Welcome into another screen share breakdown. Today we're going to dig through Tanner Bibee and Gavin Williams, a pair of pitchers that are pretty young in the Guardian system that I think they've done a really good job developing. Let's get it going. Okay, I'll start by saying that I was actually recently on Foul Territory TV, which is a recent venture with Scott Braun at the helm, AJ Przinsky, Eric Kratz, and I got a chance to defend how the Yankees develop hitters on the minor league side. I'm going to take a bet and say that if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you'll enjoy this. So I'm showing it on screen right now. This top one right here, it's from August 17th. Feel free to hop over and check it out Thursday. I'll link to it in the description as well. But it was a really fun conversation. I got to go back and forth with AJ Przinsky, which maybe it's a dream come true, you know, the not anti-analytics, but, you know, more old school, mix it in with modern analytics and old school approach. And my approach is definitely very analytics heavy. I thought it was a great discussion. Huge respect to him for kind of understanding my point and also rebuttaling me and being willing to show some energy. I think on camera is a ton of fun. We need it more on the media side. Without further ado, though, let's get going on Gavin Williams. These screen share breakdowns are fun. I rip through the pitcher. We'll talk through his mix. We'll talk through some unique traits of him, and then we'll jump over to Bibee. But let's start with Gavin. First thing I want to point out is his height. 6'6", 238. He's a big dude. Very big dude. Like 6'6" is resulting, you know, I think most pitchers are 6'4". Maybe he's not as big as I think he is. You know, we've pushed towards baseball liking that low slot carries, and generally those guys are a little shorter. But season stats on the year, he's made 10 starts as of August 17th in the major leagues, 54 and 2/3. You know, this is a really good line. Like, he's maybe overperforming, his expected stats a bit. 2.80 ERA is a great debut. 3.67 FIPS, maybe a little more representative of the pitcher he is. I think this is one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. It's probably him and Yuri Perez for me in terms of, you know, we've seen it at the major league level and all the underlying stuff looks really strong. And even some of the things we have concerns on, I think, you know, are pretty good, as we'll get into. So keep in mind that 6'6", and we'll start as we jump over to Thomas Nestico's kind of portal. I call it the portal, which is my way to kind of distill pitch information down and look at it from a pretty simple perspective, try to get you guys some idea what's going on with the pitcher and how I absorb this info. Gavin Williams, I'll link to TJ Stats, Thomas Nestico stuff in the description as well if you want to check it out. He has a Patreon where you can access exactly what I'm looking at right here. This is Gavin Williams. I'm looking at the first kind of 4 or 5 starts of his career. I'm going to split his career so far, these 10 starts, into like 6 and 4. So his most recent 4 and his prior 6. Up here, you'll see 621 to 721. This is his prior 6. The main thing I want to point out in an overview of who he is as a pitcher, I like looking at basically the only 2 biomechanical characteristics we have on the public side: extension and release height. We have arm angle, but it's a little bit funkier, not something that's easily pulled in. I like looking at extension and release height. And I want to factor in that 6'6" height, because I do think what we're starting to maybe understand more on the public side is how you're getting to that release height may have some effect on your stuff. And Williams, I think, is a good example of that, because the release height is directly around average. 5'9", 6 foot, it's average. The extension is well above average. He's like 95th percentile in terms of extension. This is like 7.5 feet. That is, I think, probably anywhere from 6 to 10 inches above the major league average. He extends a ton down the mound, especially for his height at 6'6". And the key thing here is that how he's getting to that release height, I think, is unique. He's a pretty over-the-top guy. He's able to kind of create a lot of backspin on the balls, you see right here. You know, he's probably balanced well between pronation and supination bias. I think he's maybe in the middle. I'd say he's maybe more pronation biased, given the fact that he's not a big sweep guy, and this is his probably natural slider shape right here, which doesn't have, you know, that outsized 10-plus sweep. It's a short pitch, kind of a bullet, as we'll talk about in a sec. But first half for him, you know, pretty strong. First couple starts here, you know, the mix here is 4-seam, change, slider, curve, for the most part. Let's look at, I'm going to go back into this portal. I just want to toggle between righty-lefty quick and just take a peek. This is back in the portal. I pulled this out here because sometimes this site freezes off. But yeah, it's 4-pitch mix, 4-seam, change, slider, curve, as I said. I just want to show what he's thrown to each hand in this. So this is to righties. He's 4-seam, slider, curve. That makes sense. Not a lot of right changeups. Let's rip through locations. Let me toggle this out. Let's look at the whole chunk here. Wait for this to toggle out and take a peek at his locations, which will take a sec to load. But he's basically ripping these 3 pitches to righties, and then to lefties, he's going to add in basically the changeup as one of his primary secondary pitches. To righties, this is where he's mixing things. So, again, 3 pitches. Fastball's kind of up, away. Slider down, off. That curveball down, off. That's a really simple approach. To lefties, again, he's working up, away now with the 4-seam. He'll go slider down in and curveball down and changeup down, away. So those are kind of his plots there. You can kind of see if I get that all in the same view. So this is to lefties this season for him. That gives you kind of an idea just of what's going on with his mix and where he's approaching things. It's not particularly odd in any respect, really. The main thing that I do want to point out, though, from this first 6 start sample to his most recent 4, his velocity's ticked up a lot. And I think that's really important for him as a pitcher, just from a success standpoint. So let's just walk through how he did in these first 6 starts, and I'll talk through shapes here. So 95 on the fastball, slightly above average velo. That's good. 16 IVB. For a 5.9 release height, he's probably right around average. Again, average horizontal break as well. This grades out, it's slightly above average. I think that's a product of maybe extension, velocity, combination, etc. 24% whiffs, right around league average. Again, it's an average fastball. You know, it's graded out as like 1 standard deviation above the average. That's what that 112 means, but it's playing maybe slightly below that. This was in his first 6 starts. Again, we're looking at this timetable up here, June to July. Slider, 20% of the time, 83 miles per hour. Shape's not totally dominant. That's why you're getting the stuff plus at 88, which is a below average pitch. It's -1 induced vertical, so he's working with probably some kind of slide orientation that's allowing him to rip more of a bullet. I'd assume it's probably somewhere there on the ball, and he's getting rotation like this for the most part. Maybe he's cueing it out of hand slightly different, but the resulting movement is what you'd call more bullet spin, say, than like if you're ripping slider here and you're getting more rotation that way. His pitch is a bullet, and it's taking off a little to his glove side. That's why you see the 4 inches of horizontal break. But it doesn't grade out well because that bullet shape, which you could classify as being, let's say, below 5 IVB, induced vertical break, versus below 5 horizontal. So basically anything in this circle I'm making with this magnifying glass is probably in the gyro territory. That gyro ball, so to speak, generally works really well above 85 miles per hour or so. It's not the best below 85, but he was getting pretty good results on it, and it's in zone a lot. The location plus here per Fangraphs is strong. And I talked to some other evaluators who submitted reports on him too, and I think the consensus was that the slider was a bat misser. No, excuse me, the slider was a barrel misser, not a bat misser. And I think that ranged true, especially because if we go back to our point about how he's releasing the ball, he's pretty over the top. The ability to get kind of that spiraling bullet shape and get that to drop a ton, big extension, high over the top, I think that works really well. In terms of limiting barrels, I don't necessarily know if it's going to induce a lot of whiffs, which we've seen. He's slightly below average whiff, 28% there, 33 is what you're looking at for sliders. But again, this is a strong location pitch. The curveball's big. It's low velo, you know, it grades out a little below average, is what it is there. Like that's kind of a, I don't want to say get me over pitch, but it's probably more of a late, you know, count pitch or early count. That's generally where you're seeing curveballs in today's game. You're not seeing a lot of them used aggressively. The changeup is decent, 7 miles per hour velocity separation, about 8 or so on the induced vertical separation. The stuff plus here is crazy. I'm not entirely sure why it's that high. It's gotten beat up a little in these first 6 starts. And then now let's jump to his most recent 4, and I'll just jump between these here and show you kind of the difference. And I want you to keep an eye on velocity down here. Let's keep an eye on this velocity band. Watch how that goes kind of blue to more orange, blue to more orange, blue to more orange. That is your big change. He has a velocity uptick, and that's definitely helping his profile, I think, for sure, on a couple of these pitches. That's why you've seen whiff go here. Watch this whiff. This is total whiff in his arsenal. 24 to 35. He's kept the contact quality very similar. You know, so this is just looking at those 3 things that fielder independent pitching isolates off: home runs, allowed, strikeouts, and walks. If you're maintaining zone rate and maintaining contact quality and you're able to jump velocity, which is going to help strikeouts, that FIP's going to drop and become kind of more apparent that that's successful for him. And you don't see a ton of shape, you don't see a ton of shape difference here, but the velocity thing is big. I'm going to show you how you can also kind of sort this data on Baseball Savant. We're looking at Gavin Williams' 4-seam fastball. These are generally the things that I'm going to toggle on when I'm just looking at shape changes. in a slightly different manner. Velocity, release point, release extension, vertical movement, which we were just looking at, and arm side, glove side is our horizontal break. When I search this, what it'll give me is kind of an ability to sort and take a look, just so I could show you that velocity uptrend. There's probably a graph to do this somewhere, which might be more visual. But watch this column here, right here, 95, 95, 94, 6, 95, 9, 6. Okay, little jump, 4, 2, 4, 8, 6, 6, 6, 7. These last 3 starts, which we were isolating off, I isolated off his last 4. But you could even argue in these last 3, he's just been, the velo's been way up. Ooh, I accidentally clicked into that, my bad. Velo's been way up, the shape's maintained, everything else on the shapes and everything looks good. You know, it's similar. There's not really too much of a mix change. He's just a high slot guy who's ripping everything harder. I mean, watch curveball velocity and slider velocities, breaking balls. Those go to 75.5 to 77. The big one here is the slider jump. This goes from 82.9 to 85.7. And he's maintained shape for the most part. Watch these purple dots shift up. Right, that's his slider gaining velocity. And generally what happens when you're gaining velocity on a slider that's more of a bullet shape is that he's getting behind probably the ball slightly more in terms of his release, such that you're not getting as much downward break on the ball. But generally, you have to look at the trade-off of these two elements, right? You have to look at the trade-off of how much drop am I losing, which is generally how I'm going to create whiffs relative to how much velocity I'm gaining. And this is why something like a Stuff Plus is a valuable tool, because you're able to kind of peek and see which is a better shape. Shape velocity trade-off, so to speak. But again, sliders generally pick up that vertical break as they gain velo, which, you know, that's pretty standard. The most efficient way to apply force to a baseball is by getting behind it. So if your intent or your cue, if they cued Gavin Williams to throw everything harder, or they figured something out mechanically to get him throwing harder, whether it's mental or physical, it makes sense that by ripping everything harder, he's behind everything a little more, especially that slider where you'll see that subtle variation have more an effect. And that's why that pitch is up from -1 induced vertical to 2 induced vertical. It's a 3-inch difference. And the Stuff Plus here goes down, which is funny. 88 to 74. The whiff drops slightly. 28 down to, it's the same, 30. And contact quality is still fantastic. He actually dropped it, improved. So that's interesting to me because I think Stuff Plus is missing something on the slider. And I get it because I think that slider, for the most part, is probably there not as a swing and miss offering. It can induce swing miss, but I really think his bread butter swing miss is probably the 4-seam curve combo. Like that curve deep and count, I could see that as a whiff pitch, especially at low velo if you have to ramp up for 96. But that slider is a contact quality management pitch for him. And we've seen that. We saw it in the minor leagues in terms of the contact he was inducing on it. You know, he's sub 300 X-Wob on that, X-Wob on contact. It's now 250 with the velo uptick. So I don't know. Like Stuff Plus, Fangraph Stuff Plus doesn't like that trade-off of the slider. Increasing velo, losing 3 inches of drop. It doesn't like basically the trade-off of 2 miles per hour for the 3 inches of lift to the pitch. Generally, that lift's going to result in less swing and miss. We've seen that, but I'd argue that the velocity is just helping the offering overall. I wonder if I could pull. I'm going to jump into Fangraphs. Or excuse me, this is Driveline Baseball now. I'm not sure off the top of my head whether they have a similar rating on Gavin Williams' slider, so I'm going to take a look. Sometimes this freezes up. It's a lot of data in here. Props to the Driveline folks for giving me access to this at the beginning of the year. I use it a lot in my Substack notes, which I do daily, try to do daily. It's a really cool tool. It's a different way to look at Stuff Plus. They have their own model relative to what Fangraphs and Saris does, which is awesome work. It's just different. You know, I think it's good to get multiple perspectives oftentimes. And let's see how that slider trends. This is what I'm looking for. Yeah, they like it more. So first 5 starts, 6 starts, 104. And they go to 120. You see, I'm just sorting here. Finding the average of these that I'm highlighting, and then finding the average of these. 120 versus 104. So they see an improvement on that pitch. So you have a discrepancy. I love Stuff Plus discrepancies because it gets into the philosophy and the nuance of how they're created, the models, and maybe what they're valuing slightly different. Fangraphs valuing probably drop. Driveline valuing velocity. That's, I think, as basic as it's going to get into the discrepancy of that pitch. So I like Gavin Williams. I think he's a really good pitcher. Like, the fastball is grading out well on every site. If you're looking at how stable a starting pitcher is at the major league level, I think fastball stuff. Saris champions this a lot. He does great work. Is a pretty good proxy to go off of to use that as your baseline to evaluate pitching. And if you're saying average fastball guys, we'll get into a Tanner Bibee, you got to have other breakers that are really good. And Bibee does. Williams also does. It's just a different kind, you know? It's different than you normally expect with this slider. I expect that to consistently continue to miss bats. And I also expect the four seam to have the same success as a whole. Not too much crazy here with Gavin Williams. I just wanted to, again, show that velocity uptick, how much that helps his profile. Another way to look at that velocity uptick quickly is just to peek. I pulled these in quick. This is hard to parse out, I think. I'm going to try to zoom up on it. These are Driveline baseball stuff plots. What I want to take a peek at, I kept the movement of the pitch constant and I increased the velocity interval to try to get you a picture of like what velocity does to a pitch as it increases velocity, or how a velocity increase affects a pitch quality. So this is 93 to 95, Gavin Williams shape. Watch this black dot relative to this blue circle. As we go now to 94 to 96, we're adding 1 mile per hour velocity. Okay, same dot, just watch the blue mass jump down, right? And then as we go to 95, 97, which is where he is now, the blue dot is even lower. So you can see that, watch that blue dot relative to the black dot, kind of touching it. Small margin there. And now you're getting a lighter blue in between that dot. Velocity essentially raises your floor. It raises your tolerance for movement that otherwise might not be special, so to speak, which is Gavin Williams' case, right? It was an okay fastball. It was fine. Like, we had it at a 112. Fangraphs had it at a 112. Driveline had it at a little bit lower, maybe, like a 132. And then you increase the velocity. Driveline kicks it up to a 153. And, you know, that's the difference. That's the difference this makes. Driveline, again, this is a slightly different grading system. This Driveline model is not lining up from a velocity, from a Stuff Plus standpoint with the one that we were just looking at. Slightly different modeling, but just don't think about that. Just think about, again, the dot relative to the blue mass. That velocity increasing, allowing your pitch to tolerate worse movement because you're throwing harder. That's just a really simple way to look at things. So Gavin Williams is a dog, man. I think he's a good pitcher. I really like the fastball. I think the slider will work and play above Stuff Plus. I could argue maybe he should be throwing the changeup more, but I think he's fastball slider curve. He'll work for his both-handedness. He's a really good pitcher. All right, now let's jump into Tanner Bibee. Slightly different pitcher than Gavin Williams, contrasting in a few ways. He's thrown more innings at the major league level. He's had similar success, which gets into the whole archetype of the Guardians pitching development. One thing I'll give you here quick before we jump into Bibee. I don't think I've released this data, but I've tweeted out a bit about it. Minor league, from the levels, 4 levels between Class A and AAA, combine that all together and look at organizational tendencies on fastball shape, velocity, usage, etc. for pitching specifically. And the fascinating thing here is that the Guardians are considered often one of the best organizations developing velocity, and yet they are literally, so this is what we're looking at right here. Fastballs, 4-seam fastballs in the minor leagues, and I sorted it by velocity, average velocity. If you want literal confirmation that they're one of the best orgs in baseball at developing velocity, point out the fact that they have the second lowest minor league average 4-seam fastball velocity between Class A and AAA. And consider that we just saw Gavin Williams add a tick. Tanner Bibee is another one who's throwing his sliders harder, as we'll get into a bit, who's also added some velo. Joey Cantillo is another one. He's done an unbelievable job of adding velocity. They do this over and over. Logan Allen, like it's again and again and again, and it's cool to actually get some literal confirmation that their major league 4-seam fastball velo is around like 93.6, and their average in the minors is 91.6. I believe that's one of the higher gaps in the league. But it's funny that they're like next to the White Sox and also 2 other teams that are pretty good at developing pitchers, Milwaukee and Houston. You know, not everything is the same among those 4 organizations, right? Guardians are 1A for sure. I think Milwaukee, maybe you could argue, is 1B or 2. I think Houston's maybe 2. And then the White Sox are way down in terms of the ability to develop pitching. The Guardians, though, you know, same average 4-seam velocities among those teams. The usage is really different. You can see the Guardians actually rely heavily on 4-seam fastball usage, which is cool. I wonder if that's a thing to encourage velocity development, is use the fastball more, which I've learned recently is something that teams consider, despite the fact that you're probably going to get better results throwing a slider most of the time. But that data is cool. I might be doing another video that's digging into it more specifically, but I wanted to mention it in terms of the Guardians because we're talking about these 2 pitchers. And now because we're getting into Tanner Bibee. Different guy, 4 inches shorter, similar age, lighter, smaller, Still kind of over the top, which I think gets to the fact that they probably like backspin on fastballs, and backspin on fastballs is generally going to come from guys who have higher arm angles in slots. Bibee's had similar success to Gavin Williams. It's not a lot of walks, it's limiting homers. It's a sub-3 ERA. His last couple starts, I think, have been really strong too. Let's go back, let's look like 722 maybe. Let's go 716. This is his last 6 starts. 209 ERA, so he's pitching better recently. Limiting the homers, he's kind of had some walk blips, but just strong overall versus 3 pretty good lineups. 4-5, 5 of 6 really good lineups, so I think he's probably almost pitching better. I mean, the FIP here is 3.57, so maybe he got a little bit lucky, but still really a pitcher. Let's dig into his mix. Here's Tanner Bibee. He is pretty identical to Gavin Williams. It's almost like they're building these guys in a lab or something, which they probably are. 4-seam fastball, slightly less. And this is probably the big distinction between the two of the guys, right? Bibee's fastball is not as good as Gavin Williams' fastball. So his usage of the pitch is not 55%. It is 44%. And I think it's lower based on handedness as well. He's 95. This is the timetable we're looking at here is that same window, 722 to 816. So his last 5 or 6 starts or so. He's 95-1, 16 inches of vertical, 5 inches of horizontal. He cuts the ball a little bit, right? We saw Gavin Williams hanging out more over here. Tanner Bibee's over here. He's a little more of a natural supinator than Gavin Williams, who's maybe perhaps slightly more pronation bias, which is why he's getting more backspin and not able to create big breaking ball shape, or as easily naturally create big breaking ball shape. They could probably force him into a sweeper if they wanted. I don't know if they'll do that. Doesn't really matter. Bibee, though, is hanging around this 10-inch line here, right? At good velocities as well. It's probably one of the key indicators as to whether you can supinate well, is if you could create, say, 10 inches or more of break at 85 miles per hour and stay at an above average zone right on the pitch. So he's 85. Again, it's a sweeper. It's not a big sweeper. This gets into the nuance of what are we categorizing as a sweeper? I think this is a sweeper. I imagine it's going to have some axis shift up. He's an over the top guy. There's probably some kind of curveball cue on it where that pitch will set topspin out of hand and start to drift up and glove side as it moves towards the plate. So he's 85 with 10 horizontal. I think the average sweeper is 13. The average sweeper is also lower. This is a great pitch. It's located fantastic, and it's really high stuff plus. The whiff's right around average. He's generating really strong chase. Chase is often really important to look at in terms of whiff, especially in the minor leagues when you're trying to isolate off, is he actually getting guys to swing outside of the zone? Or is this just, guys who are not good hitters swinging at things and chasing? So the fact that he's generating chase at the major league level is fantastic. The contact quality is great. The changeup's also kind of an interesting pitch. We generally look at changeups in terms of vertical separation and velocity separation. I did a video on this a while back about Patrick Sandoval and the fact that his changeup performs really well despite being kind of an odd pitch, I think because of the orientation on his. But with changeups and Bibee, because he's a natural supinator, he's to the side of the ball more. So if you think of how changeups are created, it always does this. Let's just pull this open. Sorry. There we go. This is the same plot. We're looking at just a slightly different format. If you think about how changeups are created in terms of pronation bias, you're wanting to kill spin and probably preset pronation a little more. This is generally where you're in split territory of I'm presetting pronation by forcing my hand forward. Maybe I'm turning my thumb this way to turn that wrist slightly more inward at release. With changeups on guys who are, I think, naturally kind of more supinators like this, it's hard to kill depth, which is generally why you go split, because it forces that preset pronation. But with Bibee, he's not doing that. I've never talked to him about this changeup, but this is what you call a horizontal separator changeup. Generally, they don't grade out amazing because they don't generate a ton of whiffs, but Bibee is getting a good amount with his. The velo separation here is big. Maybe that's perhaps the reason why, although velo separation from fastball to changeup, I believe, is more connected to ground balls than swing and miss. So he's 11 inches difference, 11 miles per hour difference velocity, 3 inches of reduced vertical. He's just getting behind the ball too much. He's not killing enough spin, but he is orienting the ball in a way. I'm not exactly sure how he throws this. Maybe take a look and get images and try to find one. But he's getting a lot of horizontal separation, almost 10 inches, so 9 or 10 inches on the pitch. And that's allowing the pitch to grade out at a 124 and generate above average whiffs at 42%, right? That's impressive stuff. Let's just jump back here and take a look at his usage per handedness. I just want to see locations. Go just toggle through locations, take a peek at how he's throwing these pitches. And the usage just gets you a better idea as approach. You probably should have done this at the beginning, but I think you've got a pretty good idea. Fastball slightly different. Changeup's more a horizontal separator. Righties. He is using more changeup than I thought. Interesting. Okay. 40% fastball, 40% slider. It's even split. The slider's nasty. He's able to locate it. He gets it in zone at an above average rate. Why not use it 40% of the time? Most other organizations, I think, would just have him throwing fastball well more, despite X-Wob on contact here, basically a damage stat being much higher. To lefties, I'm imagining this slider usage goes down, and I'm going to guess curveball usage goes up and changeup usage goes up slightly. And we're pretty spot on with that. A lot of four seam, so he elevates the four seam here. Generally, that cut's going to make sense to the opposite handedness. Relative cut coming kind of into the barrel as opposed to running down the barrel for righties. Doesn't grade out well in Stuff Plus. But that's not the point of the pitch, right? His fastball isn't his best offering. It's probably an offering he's more comfortable throwing for strikes and getting in the zone. But in terms of limiting, damage on it, this is why he throws sub 40% or 40% fastballs versus righties. He's more comfortable with the pitch versus lefties because of that natural cut. It's going to work better with lefty than righty. Changeup 23%, slider 13, curveball 13. So that's strong. And let's see locations quick. This is lefties locations for him. Fastball 48. Yeah, we just saw that. Up away. Four seam. I'm actually surprised that's not more inside, especially with the natural cut. Maybe he's letting it, starting it here and letting it run to the outer third, upper outer third. Slider down for the most part. Not throwing a ton. The changeup's up away. That makes sense. You generally think of changeup's down away, but because he's getting so much lift on it, again, he's essentially throwing a two-seam fastball. Or I don't want to say a sinker because it has too much backspin on it. But I don't think he really needs to get that pitch down. I actually kind of like that as a whiff pitch up, almost off the four seam. Something a lot slower in that same spot probably makes sense visually against a hitter. The curveball's up in the zone too. That's interesting. I wonder if he's trying to bury that and it's just a leak in arm side. That's lefty approach. So cool. I like that four seam location off the changeup. And then again, similarly, this changeup has a lot of backspin on, a lot of lift, such that he's going almost backdoor with the changeup as opposed to probably generating a ton of whiff, trying to generate a ton of whiff. Fastball's up. That's good. That's the spot to play that, right? This pitch is, the shape isn't great. His location is probably more average. He's got to keep it up above the zone. And the slider's really good, in zone a lot. And curveball kind of more middle of the play. I imagine that's more strike stealing. So that's his mix. Again, it's a funky changeup. I like how he works off fastball line, up away. Especially to lefties, that's cool. He's using the changeup almost more as a two-seam fastball as opposed to your traditional out-of-zone whiff changeup, which I think really works for him. The Guardians are kings of developing pitching, man. Both these guys are under 3 ERAs. Not sure how much else I have to say about Bibee. Oh, slider. We did want to talk slider quick. I did pull this and I forgot to show you. So, slider velo up here, right? 82.6, 3.8, 4.7, 5.2. Jump 5.6, 6, 5, 6, 5. Down, and then in the 4. So, it's not a huge jump. But this is pretty standard. This pitcher is a little more down action. You see this negative vertical break comes, getting more topspin, resulting topspin on the ball, and then as he's throwing it harder, it's increasing. Exact same concept we applied to Gavin Williams, right? Behind the ball more as you're throwing it harder on a slider. It's going to result in increased vertical movement and increased velocity. And the grade, we'll see kind of what happens with it. It depends on obviously the resulting shape of that offering. But this is cool stuff. He's the man. I like Bibee a lot. I like the mix. I get it's not the same construct as Gavin Williams' fastball approach, but his secondaries are good. He's got better secondaries than Gavin Williams. They're different pitchers that are similar, if that makes any sense. They have the exact same mix. Gavin throws the fastball more because it's better. Bibee throws the fastball less because it's worse. Bibee has nasty secondaries. Gavin's working off fastball. It's fun, man. Guardians are a fun organization. Thanks for digging in. If you have any questions or comments, or do you have thoughts on Bibee or Gavin Williams, definitely let me know in the comments. I always love hearing other people's perspectives or if any of my takes are off. So thanks for watching.